It is still the Ways and Means Committee inside this room and still the 18th. At 11:20 a.m., we are going to talk until lunchtime about the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy report on who pays. And we're going to start hearing from Joyce Manchester at JFO, and then we'll hear from Stephanie Yu at Public Assets Institute. So Joyce, thank you. Is this your first time on the committee this year?
This session.
Happy New Year from all.
Happy New Year.
Ways and Means.
Everyone.
Yes. You.
Very good. I'm Joyce Manchester for the Joint Fiscal Office, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Is it working? No. No.
I think that version is fine if it works. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, good morning. So it's always exciting to see the new version of this report. It comes out every 4 or 5 years. The last one was in 2018, and I'm not sure if COVID slowed them down. But anyway, we have a new version this year, and we're going to see how Vermont ranks compared to other states in terms of the progressivity of its tax system. So here we go. Yeah, so here's the outline. What is ITEP? What does the Who Pays report look at? Where does Vermont rank? How do sister states or neighboring states rank? And what is included and not included? And that's sort of an interesting discussion. So we'll touch on that at the beginning and then spend more time at the end. So ITEP is a 501c3, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. It's the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. It's a tax and budget policy advocacy group that focuses on state and federal tax policy issues. So their report, Who Pays, is looking at how and from whom state and local governments collect tax revenue. And I will say this several times, but when they say tax revenue, they are referring to income taxes, consumption taxes, and property taxes. Okay, so that's what they're looking at. Income, consumption, and property. Yes, and the other important part is that they are looking at the impact of those taxes on people under age 65. So they're not thinking about older people who are more likely to be retired. Yes, Representative.
When you say property, does that include just personal property or just land?
Yeah, land.
Just
Yeah.
land property.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes. What we would call education tax.
Okay.
Yes. We being Vermont. Yes, and these are taxes that have been enacted through January 1st, 2024. So basically through the last legislative session. And there I'm saying it again, income taxes, consumption taxes, and property or education taxes. So we have non-tax revenue that's largely excluded from this analysis, and ITEP is upfront about that. They say this, they have a chart that looks at each state's percentage of non-tax revenue. So we'll come to that a bit later. Okay, so the first question is, if we were in an ideal world, how would states collect tax revenue? And you'll recall that one of the basic principles of a high quality tax system is fairness. And one element of fairness is usually considered to be, do taxpayers with higher income pay a larger share of their income as taxes? And that's frequently seen in the charts I have here. Vertical equity. So households with greater income pay a greater share of income in taxes. And on the left, in the greenish bluish bars, you can see that progressive tax. So people in the lowest 20% pay the lowest rate, and people in the top 1% pay the highest rate. That's the ideal tax system. A regressive tax goes the other way. So people at the low end are paying a higher share of their income in taxes, generally not considered to be a good thing. Okay, so what are the findings of the Who Pays report? Well, you can see from this bar chart that it's not great news. These are the average tax rates across all states in the US. And you can see that we, on average, are looking at a regressive tax system. We have a high rate of 11.3%, on the lowest 20%, and a relatively lower rate of 7.2% on the top 1%. So this is not a good finding. This looks like a regressive system on average. Okay, and then we come to Vermont. So I've copied this. I'm sorry if the resolution is not perfectly clear, but I've copied this from the ITEP report. So Vermont ranks 49th, and 49th means really good. The top state is ranked 50, and then DC is actually the most progressive jurisdiction. They're ranked 51. So in terms of states, we are second best in terms of progressivity rank.
Who's us?
Minnesota. And I'm going to show you their.
Alert Choice thinks we are actually better than us.
Yes, we're going to talk about.
What is the fence for everyone?
We gotta have some room for growth.
Yep.
DC.
Joyce, is this outfit clued into our eccentric use of credits and other offsets? Because that's where we are so different.
Yes, absolutely. Some of you will remember Aidan Davis, who was here as an analyst in the Joint Fiscal Office in the, let's say, mid to late teens. And she is now the ITEP analyst who looks at Vermont. So I think we have a pretty good representation there. Yeah, they try to do a good job.
We just adjust what's paid for
Absolutely.
what's given
This
back,
is
so to
the
say.
Effective tax rate. So
Okay.
it's what people actually pay.
And if after hearing from Joyce and Steph, you from Public Assets, we want to go deeper on this, we can absolutely invite ITEP in to
Yes.
talk about their report themselves. Or we can even invite folks from Minnesota in to talk about their taxes if we want. Joyce.
Great. So here's Vermont's result. And you can see that the lowest 20%, according to the ITEP analysis, pay 6.3%. We then go up the scale and we peak at the next 15%, which would be the 80 to 95th percentile. And that peak is at 10.6%. And then there's a slight drop off as we go to the 95th to 99th at 10.3, and then the top 1% at 10.1%. So you can see we're not entirely progressive because the bars don't keep going up, but we're pretty progressive. We are progressive, and then we're sort of flat and falling off a tiny bit. So that's not bad, but there is room for improvement, right? Yes. Okay. So now let's talk about some of the other states and jurisdictions that are considered more equitable, as ITEP says, more equitable, less regressive. So there are 10 jurisdictions with not regressive state and local tax systems. 7 of the 10 do not worsen income inequality overall and lessen inequality across some groups. In other words, they're progressive across some of the categories, like Vermont. So those 7 jurisdictions are California, DC, Maine, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, and Vermont. Okay. The other 3 have tax codes that tilt slightly regressive, but just barely slightly regressive overall. And that includes Massachusetts, New Mexico, and Oregon. And Massachusetts apparently has come up, well, has done better in the rankings because of the recent imposition of their millionaire tax. You probably heard about that. It is true, however, that none of these 10 tax systems are robustly progressive. In other words, entirely progressive in that traditional sense. DC is least regressive, but the top 5% of DC families pay 11.2%. The bottom 95% pay 11.6%. So tilting's the wrong way. Okay, and it's worth thinking about the policies that lead to more equitable tax systems. So these are outlined by ITEP. I've simply taken these from the ITEP report. So a highly progressive income tax bracket system and rate system, use of targeted fundable low-income credits, so they're very aware of those. Broad-based income taxes, don't leave much out of the tax base, and higher reliance on income taxes, lower reliance on regressive consumption taxes. Because we know that lower income people spend a higher proportion of their income on consumption. So if you're taxing consumption, you're taxing a bigger part of the total income of lower income people. Questions? Good.
Representative voting.
Thank you. So, do you have charts for Vermont with where you pull out income alone and consumption alone and property alone? Because to me, that's going to make a big difference. This is lumping them. It's not helpful to me.
So if you go back to the primer that we did on the Vermont tax system, we did at the beginning of last session, and there are special sessions on the income tax, the consumption tax, and the education tax. You will see those individual, well, not for consumption tax, because we don't have data to say who's paying consumption tax by income. Do not have that data. But for income tax and property tax, you will see those.
And those are posted on our landing page on the website.
Yes, I've seen that. So I'll try to dig through that and find it. If I have trouble,
Shouldn't be hard to find, but certainly ask questions. Yeah.
One last thing, to me, it could be part of this presentation, because that we would all look at it at once, not just.
Okay. I'm gonna try this. Did not go into slideshow. Yeah, no. Okay.
I don't know, but now we can see Grady's comments.
I think if you go to the upper left, hit from the beginning.
Oh, yes.
Or from current slide.
Perfect. Oh, no, now I'm way down there. Okay. Vermont, more equitable states. Okay, yes. So states with ranking close to Vermont and neighboring states. So the least regressive states. So the more progressive states is another way to say that. Minnesota is the best, Vermont next, then New York, and then California. And I'm going to show you the bar charts for those 4 states in just a minute. And then we have the neighboring states. I thought I would just tell you what their ranking is. So Connecticut, not great at 21. Maine is pretty good at 45. Massachusetts just behind them at 44. New Hampshire, not so good at 18. And they get a lot of their revenue, 62% of their revenue from property taxes, which do not tend to be present. And then Rhode Island is not great, but about in the middle at 31. So that's a quick overview of where our neighbors are. And now we're going to look at the advancing. Okay, I'm stuck.
Try clicking on your presentation. And then try the arrow again.
Excellent. Okay, so here is Minnesota. And again, these are the charts that appear in the ITEP report. So you can see that Minnesota is very progressive, going up to the 4th, that means the 60th to 80th percentile, but then they drop down, right? So it seems to me that they are peaking at the 60th to 80th percentile, where you don't want to peak, and then dropping down for the 80 to 95th, and then same for the 95th to 99th, and then bumping up again for the top. So I'm not sure that if I made the rules for progressivity, that I would say they are doing better than we are.
And so does that mean that they're middle class? I mean, we can define middle class in a
Yes.
wide variety of ways that I don't want to do right now, but sort of those folks at the peak are really carrying a lot of the burden. So they might be protecting lower income taxpayers, but a lot of the burden of their taxes or responsibility for their taxes sits in that, with that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Representative Anthony?
That's where I was going. I assume that what seems to be a suspicious ranking of number 50 may be influenced by the weighting
Yes,
of the
Yes.
proportion of different people in different brackets, et cetera.
yes, and if anyone is interested, ITEP does have an appendix, I think, where they specify their equation that determines ranking, right? So you can see what they're looking at.
Yep.
And it is true that the lowest tax rate for the lowest 20% is lower than Vermont's. And I believe, well, let's go to the next slide. This is at 10.5 for the top 1%. Now we're at 10.1%. So they do have a higher rate for that top 1%, and that counts in their equation. So yeah, things happen. And you have to choose some system, right, in order to rank all 50 states. So they have what they have. Okay, and you know, the next slide shows Vermont, just so that it's easy to compare. But we've seen that before. So now let's go to, this is New York. And you can see that New York again goes progressive for a bit, although they're 11.1% on the lowest 20%, in my opinion, is rather high. Their top 1% at 13.5% is certainly high. It's 3 percentage points higher than we've seen before. So, but notice 13.8%, pretty high tax rate on the fourth and the next 15%. So 60 to 95% are all paying 13.8%. So that's New York. And then we come to California, and you can see, oh, it's unfortunate that California has this bump up at 11.7% for their lowest 20%. But they do tip up to 12% for the top 1%. So again, it's dependent on how you define that.
47 is pretty flat.
Yes, absolutely.
I know, yeah. To me, it's notable that they're 47 despite their lowest income bracket.
Yes. Yes, well, things get worse. And you saw the average, right? I mean,
That's the point of the
Yes.
presentation.
yes. Yes, Representative.
For me, I'm tempted to misread this as having specifically to do with the income tax, but my guess is that it is the weighting between a property and a sales and an income.
Mhm. They
And
all
so
matter, sure.
The high percentage at the low end is probably a result of the importance of the sales tax or property tax
Mhm.
in the overall universe of
Right.
collections.
Right.
That's what's going on.
California is known as a progressive income tax state, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Onwards.
So a caveat regarding non-tax revenues, and I alluded to this earlier. So there are no non-tax revenues as defined by ITEP in the analysis, but many of those non-tax revenues are collected in a way that's not related to income, right? So it's things like road tolls, public parking, park fees, all of those things. Court fees and fines may be particularly bad for low income and marginalized communities. They spend more time in court traditionally. So those fees could very well be regressive and could change the overall results of the ITEP charts. And then you have a few excluded revenues that could be progressive. So estate and inheritance taxes, for example, are likely to be progressive. Real estate transfer taxes are based on the value of the property that's being transferred. So those are probably progressive. And then there is the way that ITEP looks at corporate income taxes just ignores all the corporate income taxes paid by stockholders who are out of state, right? So Vermonters are paying some piece of corporate income taxes because they get dividends from out of state stock holdings, right? Those are not included in this overall picture because it would be very difficult to do that. But anyway, there are some excluded pieces that would change the way that the results come out, and you just have to be aware of that. So so the point is that in fiscal year 2021, Vermont got 21.6% of its Vermont-based revenue from non-tax revenue, not included in the ITEP analysis. And here I'm showing you that Alaska got almost 63% from non-tax
The oil.
revenue because of oil.
Royalty.
So they ranked number one there from non-tax revenue. And surprisingly, I was sure that New Hampshire was going to get a big chunk from non-tax revenue. It's just 24.5%, and they are right above Vermont in terms of the share of their total state revenue that comes from non-tax revenue. But again, they get most of their revenue from property tax.
Joyce?
Good. Thank you.
I mean, do you think it would be a useful exercise in going deeper on that and trying to paint like a comprehensive story about who pays with both of those revenue sources in mind? Or is it
Absolutely.
so difficult, or have we already done that?
So we did the 10-year tax study back in 2017, I think, 2018, something like that. So it goes 2005 to 2015. And it allocated 90% of Vermont's taxes to Vermont's own revenues to chunks of the tax code and pretty much to people. It's really difficult to look at the distribution of those fees and
And to know which income category.
Yeah.
What.
where would you put them? Yeah, it's really tough to know. And consumption taxes are another whole category that would be, I mean, they're using nationwide data to say, okay, low income people spend this much on these taxable items, and therefore we assign so much to them. And we could do something like that in a summer study. It would take a lot of work. Yes, but it would be really interesting.
Maybe there's some things that would be easier.
Sure, there would be some things.
I want us to go to Stephanie Yu's presentation and really, again, this is not the last time we'll talk about this. We can go deeper on this. We can have Joyce back. We can have ITEP come in entirely. I think it's really interesting to look at sort of what the top rate and the bottom rate is, even in those states we're being compared to, all of that. We can spend time on that. But I want to make sure we have time to get to stuff. So thank you very much. If you'd like to, that would be great. Thanks. Steph, welcome. Happy New Year from the Ways and Means Committee. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks. Nice to see you all. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm out of state at the moment, but doing my best here. So Joyce covered a lot of things. So I'll introduce myself and I'll just run through. I think she hit a lot of the highlights, and I'll just kind of lift up a few more things and then answer any questions as they come up. So I'm Stephanie Yu, the Executive Director of Public Assets Institute, and we work on state fiscal policy with the goal of improving the well-being of all Vermonters and also advancing racial and economic equity. And we're part of a network of similar organizations around the country, and we're in about 44 states. And then we work with a number of national partners, including ITEP. And ITEP really does a lot of great work, and I think this report is probably their biggest contribution to state policy work, because it is really the most comprehensive kind of comparative look across all these state and local tax systems. It is, as Joyce was saying, the last one was in 2018, and they do it every few years, but this has sort of been a longer period since between reports, in part because of all the economic disruptions of the pandemic, both, sort of the economic disruptions and the data collection disruptions. So, but the other piece of what's changed, and they've also done some things in terms of the methodology, I think that really improved the report. In the last version, as Joyce sort of pointed out, this distinction between tax and non-tax revenue. In the last version, they were picking up about 90% of all tax revenue, and in this version, it's about 99.7%. And they sort of give you the state-by-state numbers, but Vermont actually comes in right at 99.7%. So similar to the national total. So it really is getting pretty much all that tax revenue and painting a pretty good picture of what's going on. So I think I did post some slides. I don't know if it's helpful to share screen or if you all prefer to just pull it up. I'm not sure what.
It would be great if you could share. Thank you.
Let me do that. I don't have too many, and many of them are similar to the charts you saw from Joyce, but let me just get to.
And if it's easier for you for us to pull them up ourselves, we can also do that.
I can do it. I'm just taking a second here.
Okay,
Sorry about that. Let's see.
no, we will have a brief and delightful moment of silence.
So here you all go, and I will get my slideshow. Let's get to the slideshow here. Okay, so so again, Joyce sort of hit the highlights here, but I think the bottom line here is this is sort of what it looks like across all the states, right? The average effective rates across all the states, and it does sort of have this regressive shape. So I think it's worth. I think Joyce put a lot of the numbers, which is helpful. But I think what I want to focus on is sort of the shape of these charts, right? So this is the regressive shape. It sort of it goes down as you go to the right to the higher income piece, and that's what it looks like across the states. And then Vermont, and it's not cooperating, letting me share without taking over my whole screen. So Vermont goes the other way, right? So this is more, it clearly looks more progressive. And I'm not sure, I can't remember who asked the question, but I did pull out what ITEP's estimates are for the individual taxes. And again, as Joyce was saying, these are sort of the big three category of taxes, right? There are these pockets of non-tax revenue, and then there's lots of times there's sort of little taxes, which they try to pick up a lot of the little taxes, things like, if you pay a tax on your car, registering your car, or that kind of thing. There's sort of these little things that are included, but most of them are really pretty small and don't make a huge difference. These are really the big three of taxes, right? Your sales tax, your property taxes, and your income taxes. And they're the taxes that don't really tend to fluctuate as much year to year. Like in any given year, you might buy a car, you might buy a house, but you're not doing that every year. Whereas these taxes are really the taxes that are going to be consistent, that you're paying every year pretty much. So this is a whole picture. You've seen this chart, but this is what the sales tax piece looks like in Vermont. So these are all Vermont specific charts, but I'll tell you that they look pretty similar across the states. The sales tax is always regressive. And even in states like Vermont, where we exclude a lot of things, we exclude, groceries and clothing, you still have this regressive effect because I think there's stuff that people have to buy. And oftentimes that amount of stuff that people have to buy doesn't necessarily, at a certain point, it sort of falls off, right? It doesn't keep going up with income indefinitely. There's sort of so much that you need to consume, and then it kind of drops off as you go up the income scale, which is why it shows up as regressive. And then here's I'm sorry?
So it's just someone sneezed.
Oh, okay. I couldn't tell if it was a question. And here's the property tax slide for Vermont. And this is an interesting one because to what you were talking about earlier, because of the income sensitivity in our property tax, it looks pretty different actually from other states. Most states, this chart really regressive with that sort of low on the higher end. And again, it's a similar sort of idea, which is at a certain point, your property value doesn't keep going up with your income, right? So it doesn't keep up. So it tends to be regressive. So in most states, New Hampshire, Florida, you're going to see these really sharply regressive property taxes. And ours is pretty progressive on the low end because of income sensitivity, and then kind of lowers out and looks more like the other states in those pieces. And then, just to put the last sort of one up there, the personal income taxes. It really shows you how the personal income tax is really the progressive piece, and so in the few states so I think it's worth, as Joyce was saying, we're one of 6 states plus DC where we don't make income inequality worse, and we actually make it better. And just to kind of lift up what that means is that, so after state taxes, there's less income disparity than before state taxes, which is not true in 44 other states, right? In 44 other states, they're making the gap worse after state taxes. So that's pretty huge. And I think it's just worth noting here that if you look at what the top 1% pays in personal income taxes, it's around 6.2%, which is quite similar to ITEP's estimate of what the lowest 20% is paying in sales taxes, right? So you can see there's sort of that parallel there, but you can see how the personal income tax, the progressive personal income tax, is really offsetting a lot of the regressivity in the sales tax. And then that property tax is sort of a mixed bag in Vermont, unlike in other states where it's pretty much regressive. So I'm sorry, was that a question?
Nope.
Or you're just an
I
echo?
promise I will,
Okay, you'll highlight it.
I'll
if
be
it
loud,
happens.
I will be loud in alerting you.
Okay.
Representative Odie actually does have a question.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that the third, the fourth, and in those percentiles, where's the income of between 100 and 120,000?
So the fourth, I think the 15% kicks in. Let me just pull it up so I tell you the exact number. I think it kicks in about 135,000. Let me just make sure I'm looking at the right chart. It's about 135,000 at the 80th percentile. That's where that kicks in. And then so that the fourth 20,
Sorry, 100 and
135, about 135, 136,000 is where that 80th percentile is. And so the fourth 20th is going, and I can share all these charts. I think that first one, let me pull it up again. I think that first one does have the brackets on it. Just so you can see, if you can see there, it tells you where those numbers are. So, and that's pretty comparable. I think there's, you often hear sort of like, well, where does our 1% start versus where other states 1% starts, or sort of where's our, it's, they're pretty comparable up until about that 4%, the top 4%, that top 1%, there's some differences. Somewhere between 120 and 150,000 is sort of where that 80th percentile tends to kick in. And you can look at the US averages of that too, but we're pretty in keeping with that, with where the rest of the states are. There's a range, but it's not so far off. So,
Sorry, Steph, we have one more question.
What's the question? I think it would be interesting to see a slide from some other country also, just from what is considered a very progressive country, to see what kind of numbers that might be. It would be interesting to see that sometime. I realize you don't have this.
That would be super fun. Yes, let's add that to a future presentation.
absolutely.
Representative Demrow and then Representative Odie, and I want to make sure that we give Steph time for her presentation.
Sure. Hi, Steph. Just going back to your last slide on the personal income tax, that on the lowest 20% there, that refundable section there where it goes underneath, is that all the CTC and EITC? Are there any other tax credits in there that are responsible?
Yeah, there was also that increase in the dependent tax credit and dependent care credit too. So but that's pretty much what it is. And you can see, I have the slide of what it all looked like in 2018, and you can see there's a pretty big difference. And a lot of that difference is driven by the increases in the EITC and the child tax credit, and then that dependent care credit too.
Thanks.
Back to you, Steph.
Okay. So I do just want to kind of highlight again the progressive income tax. So all these states that don't exacerbate income inequality have this progressive income tax. It does offset what's going on with the consumption taxes and the property taxes. Although, like I say, we do some work on the property taxes ourselves as a state, which is unique among states. But I think it's also just worth acknowledging that part of the reason we have a progressive income tax is for a long time, through the 90s, we were piggybacking on the federal system, which is a progressive income tax as well. And then when we sort of went off on our own in 2002, we kept this progressive model, and it does make a big difference. And I think I might have previewed this Florida picture, but I did want to show. So Florida is the least is considered the most regressive state, so ranks last in this study. And you can see sort of how that goes. And again, it's because it relies on sales taxes and property taxes. and doesn't have an income tax. So as a result, what you see is, the lowest 20% is paying double what they're paying in Vermont, 13.2%, while that top 1% is down to 2.7%. So this is sort of the definition of a regressive system. And you do see in those states where they rely more on sales taxes and property taxes that you do have this regressive effect when there's no income tax. So, I think it's a lot of good news. It's a lot to be proud of about the Vermont system. There's definitely been some improvements in the last 5 years. So I will go back and sort of show you this. This is what it looked like in 2018. And I think we always referred to this as sort of bumpily progressive, not so progressive, but you can even see sort of that slope on the lower end has really changed quite a bit. And then there's been some improvements too. And again, some of this is methodology changes, but we know there's been these real tax changes in terms of the EITC, the CTC, but also on the higher end, sort of moving away from itemized deductions and some of those other things has sort of made the higher end more progressive as well. So, it's not exactly apples to apples because of some of these changes, but you can see the effects of some of these changes when you compare the kind of the 2018 version to the current version. So, and as Joyce said, I think, there is still this effect in our current version of the top 5% paying lower. And again, I think that's often true. You saw the Minnesota numbers, you saw sort of the California, New York numbers, and that inequality index to sort of the earlier conversation, that inequality index is really it kind of looks at three things. It sort of looks at, and I might be getting the exact pieces, not quite, but it's looking at the top 1% against the bottom 20%. Then I think it looks at the sort of bottom 60 against the top 20. Like there's a couple of pieces, but they are looking at that in totality. They're looking at the total impact, not necessarily parsing out those individual kind of types of taxes. They do weight it somewhat for how reliant a state is on the different kinds of taxes, but obviously that's showing up in how, and how they affect how much people are paying for any given tax. So, I think it is just kind of worth noting that there is room for improvement, especially at the top. And, those are the main pieces I wanted to lift up. I will just say that I think another sort of theme of the report, not just focusing on kind of the individual states rankings, but a theme of the report was kind of acknowledging that there are these sort of two contrasting trends, right? There's what's been going on in Vermont and Minnesota and Massachusetts and DC, which is really trying to take the tax system in a more progressive direction and make sure that there's adequate support for low-income residents. So part of what's moved all those states those states are moving in a progressive direction, both by sort of making more refundable credits available at the low end, but also sort of either closing some loopholes or adjusting some things or increasing taxes on the higher end. So kind of doing both to change that slope. And then the flip side of that is that there's also a number of states that are going in the other direction, that are getting more and more regressive by either already eliminating their income tax or proposing to, there's proposals on the table in a number of states to eliminate their income tax, or, in states that don't have it, there's ongoing resistance to sort of instituting an income tax, or even making a current graduated tax flat. So there is sort of these kind of competing trends, and Vermont's really a leader among these other states in moving in a more progressive and fair direction.
Thank you, Steph. I'm getting the feeling from the committee that folks would like to dive deeper in all of this. And so would you be able to come back in the near future to talk to us more sometime next week or so?
Of course, anytime.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining us. We will see you sometime next week. And I will share with you a bunch of questions that the committee would like to address at that point. Thank you.
Sounds good.
So,
thank you.
We are going to, again, talk about this next week. I will collect people's questions. If you could email them to me, that would save me some effort, and I'd appreciate it. And we are going to we have the e-board this afternoon, and then we are back in this committee room at 3:30. If you could be in your seat at 3:25, I would so much appreciate it. and to talk about the e-board forecast with Tom Cavat. Thanks, everyone.
So e-board is at 1 o'clock, the governor's office.
No, it's at 2:30.